So when you respond to drug use with incarceration, it creates disconnection in that person's life. Now they have a criminal record to deal with, which makes finding work really difficult, as well as finding housing. And all of these things, the collective experience of all of these things are really traumatic for people and hard for them to overcome. And research has conclusively shown that trauma is the ultimate driver of addiction in the first place. So we've created this system that exacerbates the problem. All right, so what prohibition is actually doing, for the market, it drives it underground and there's more crime. The substance, it creates contamination, which leads to more overdoses. The consumer, it creates incarceration and criminal justice involvement in that person's life, and that leads to more broken lives. So what can we do, right? Where's the life preserver in this mess of drug policy that we have? Well, we believe that our life preserver comes in the form of harm reduction and practicing that harm reduction ideology in all aspects of how we respond to drug use. So what is harm reduction, you ask? For those of you who have never heard of it, this is not a new idea either. We have been doing harm reduction in many, many areas of our lives for a really long time. So my buddy Google says that the definition of harm reduction is reducing the risk associated with any inherently dangerous activity, right? This is not a new concept either. So let's take a break for a minute, y'all. Set drugs aside, set cannabis aside, set alcohol aside, totally different industry. Let's look at the automobile industry. So the first cars that were sold to consumers were really, really dangerous contraptions, right? They had kerosene headlamps. There was no seatbelt. Like seatbelts were decades away from being invented. They had no speedometer. It was just like the wild, wild west. And what they found is that the first vehicles that were sold to consumers were really, really dangerous. Within a year, vehicle fatalities began to go up. The more people that bought cars, the more people that began to die. There was actually a movement by grassroots organizers to outlaw the motor vehicle. They said it was the devil's contraption, right? And so what did we do to help reduce the risk with this inherently dangerous activity of driving? The government did not outlaw driving. They recognized, this is probably here to stay with us. So now we have enacted all of these harm reduction measures. This is just 4 of them. There are thousands. Child car seats, seat belts, speed limit signs, traffic lights, road signs. I could give you hundreds of roadway design examples that we as engineers used to increase safety, from guardrails on bridges to putting chipped glass in paving striping, so that if you cross over the striping in a lane, you hear that whir, that humming sound, right? Those are harm reduction measures designed to decrease the risk associated with the inherently dangerous activity of driving. And what happened? Well, if you look at motor vehicle death rates over the past 100 years, you see that, per capita, they have continuously fallen as vehicles have gotten safer. That is harm reduction in, oh, excuse me, did I miss a slide? I did, actually, I think a slide's missing. So now, another industry a little bit closer would be the industry of tobacco, right? Smoking was this really popular, smoking and the use of tobacco products was really popular in our society, but also really dangerous. And our governing bodies have chosen to enact harm reduction responses after, after recognizing the harms of the tobacco industry. So now you have warning labels, you have e-cigarettes, you have Nicorette gum, you have a massive public awareness campaign about the harms associated with smoking, right? And over the last 4 decades, smoking rates among adults and youth have continued to decline. And that is because we have done a great job of educating about smoking, but also providing harm reduction alternatives. And essentially, like the most important thing to know is that it's never been a criminal activity to use tobacco products, right? And if you want to stop, there are free cessation clinics that you can go, but it is every person's choice. So how can we reduce harms from drugs? Well, one country that has done that would be Portugal. So in 2001, Portugal had a heroin addiction rate that was 5 times greater than the United States is today. Almost 1% of their population was injecting heroin on a daily basis. And their prime minister was like, we cannot sustain this. We cannot continue this way. So what are we going to do? And he brought together a panel of scientists, addiction experts, medical experts, criminal justice professionals, and they said, we are going to take the most radical step of any country in the world at that time, and they decriminalized possession of all drugs. So from cannabis to crack, all drugs have been decriminalized. And what they did is they addressed this third category of harm here. And they went from treating people who use substances as criminals. Now they treat them as patients needing help. Crucially, the next step, they shifted their drug intervention budget. So they now spend 90% of their drug intervention dollars on prevention and treatment and only 10% on enforcement. In contrast, or in comparison, the United States does the exact opposite. Today, we spend 90% of our drug intervention dollars go to enforcement, and that's everything from DEA to Border Patrol to criminal justice system. We only use 10% on prevention and treatment. Imagine what that could look like if it were just 50-50. So did it help in Portugal? Well, the results of reform are in. It's now been 20 years. Injection drug use is down by 60%. Drug addiction rates are down by 70%. And also drug-related crimes are also massively down. So again, what Portugal did to reduce the harms in their countries, they addressed this third category of harm by decriminalizing substances. But I want to know, how do you address these other categories of harm, right? Because I want to see overdose death rates go down, and I want to see violence in our communities go down also. So how do we address those? Because when you decriminalize, you still have the underground market. Well, the only way that you can address all 3 categories of harm is through some kind of legal regulation model. And that will bring the market out of the underground where there's violence happening amongst criminals and put it back into regulated, safe environments like behind a counter. And the substance, the only way to get rid of contamination is to bring it back where it can be regulated and quality control can be implemented on it, and it can be FDA approved. So, what we're seeing is you do not have to swallow this whole pill of a drug war, right? There are always going to be harms that come from substances, whether that substance is a cookie or, a chocolate chip cookie, or it's heroin. There will always be harms associated with substances, but you do not have to have this whole other bigger category of harm from the war on drugs and criminalization.